I want to get. We're going to play. We're going to go through a kind of rundown of what some leaders who we really respect, have to say about this. But while we're on the subject, I did want to share and read the DSA statement because we're looking at what's happening within the Labor Party, and the Democratic Socialists of America have been targeted domestically as well. They put out a statement that I agree with, and I think was very strong. I'll read the whole thing here because it's not that long. And the response to this has been pretty exceptional. But this is the official statement from the DSA on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The DSA condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine and demands immediate diplomacy and de-escalation to resolve this crisis. We stand in solidarity with the working classes of Ukraine and Russia, who will undoubtedly bear the brunt of this war, and with anti-war protesters in both countries and around the world who are calling for diplomatic resolution. This extreme and asymmetrical escalation is an illegal act under the United Nations Charter and severely threatens the livelihoods and well-being of working class people in Ukraine, Russia, and across the region. We urge an immediate ceasefire and the total withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine. There is no solution through war or further intervention. This crisis requires an immediate international anti-war response, demanding de-escalation, international cooperation, and opposition to unilateral coercive measures, militarization, and other forms of economic and military brinkmanship. DSA reaffirms our call for the United States to withdraw from NATO and to end the imperialist expansionism that set the stage for this conflict. We call on anti-war activists in the United States and across the world to oppose violent escalations, demand a lasting diplomatic solution, and stress the crucial need to accept any and all refugees resulting from this crisis. Much of the next 10 years are coming into view through this attack. While the failure of the neoliberal order are clear to everyone, the ruling class is trying to build a new world through a dystopic transition grounded in militarism, imperialism, and war. Socialists have a duty to build an alternative. No war but class war, which I think is as principled of a statement as you can make. It's very severe in its consequences, in its condemnation of Russia's actions, but it also recognizes a position that is not unique to just some people. I hate the accusation that's like, oh, this is a kind of being anti-NATO, some kind of fringe online position. This is a position of pretty much every people's movement across the globe, from Brazil to Bolivia to much of the Western European left, that NATO has been a unnecessary and extremely dangerous cash grab for American weapons manufacturers. It has been a way to sort of impose, and expand Western power eastward, right? None of that excuses Putin's decision. And, the real irony, tragedy, however you want to say it, of what Putin has done is it probably only is going to bolster support for NATO, which seemed like it was on its back legs, before this. But undoubtedly, NATO is going to come back with more fervor as more and more people think mistakenly that this, alliance, is a force for good. But just because that might be the case, yeah.
NATO's going to be all right, even if left podcasters are taking cracks at it, and the strategy, how sound it is. They'll be fine.
But it's still an extremely dangerous alliance that has sort of created, it's worked to create the conditions that it says it's working to oppose, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And beyond this, we're going to go to these other speakers in just a second. But I just wanted to note that what we've seen in response to this should worry everyone, because there has been a demand that, again, this is not some Looney Tunes statement recognizing or supporting, for example, Putin's invasion and occupation and recognition of of Eastern Ukraine. Right. This is not a statement that is coming out in support of, the madness of this conflict. This is a statement that says this conflict should stop, that we need to pursue diplomacy, right? Which should always be an option. That is how wars end. Right. And also, the militaristic Western American imperialist organization that has played a role in rationing up conflict, not just in Ukraine, but across Eastern Europe and not just in a kind of symbolic way, all the way up to hot wars in the 90s, has not played a role, a role in promoting peace, but rather has created a rivalry, a military rivalry between, Russia and the rest of the world, right? Because when the Russians were interested in maybe participating, so that effectively the need for NATO to be an adversarial military alliance, the West wasn't interested, right? So let that be that, but also know that the White House has come at them at the DSA, right, which should worry you. Extremely powerful media figures have come at them, right, and there is a demand for many people, particularly amongst the more wealthy leaning liberal class in this country, that are saying that any kind of standing out of line with the very specific American line on this thing, reaches the level of, if treason at worst, if nothing else, a severe disloyalty to one's own country, right? And that's the kind of rhetoric that you should be very worried about, because these things happen quickly, and they happen brutally when it comes to attacking and shutting down dissent from the left.
Yeah, and I think the World War I example, like, I don't know how that isn't the guide at this point. Like, and look, if Putin keeps on like a Hitlerian march and starts like getting into NATO countries, like, I think that changes the conversation too, and then we can talk about that. But that's not where we're at now. And I think that I applaud that DSA statement. I think that was really well emphasized.
Yeah. Well, let's get to these. I know we've been going long, but I think it's worth Matt and I spending time to go through these, because we don't get to do shows every day to sort of react to things. I want to start with something that is, I think, first and foremost the direct thing that we need to start to be talking about, worrying about, is this refugee crisis, and finding ways to be humane about this. In the United States, we should absolutely open up the country to refugees of Ukraine, and frankly of all countries, and to provide them the status that is necessary for them to either maintain life here while conditions in their own country is unbearable for them, and also create paths so that they can settle here permanently if they so desire. Here's AOC, I think, actually making this argument very well, with Rachel Maddow, who has played a very bad role, by the way, in rationing up all of this shit. But we'll
about those politics.
We can ignore that for now.
Yeah.
Rachel, I'm not going to play all of Rachel's question, but effectively she is asking AOC what she thinks about a coming refugee crisis from Ukraine.
About the inevitable demonization of those victimized people.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I think the world is watching, and many immigrants and refugees are watching, and how the world treats Ukraine should be, and Ukrainian refugees should be, how we are treating all refugees in the United States. I mean, especially when you look at such stark juxtapositions where so many of the factors are in common with Syria, for example. The way the world treated Syrian refugees versus the way that the world is greeting Ukrainian refugees is a very stark contrast. And I think that the way that we are looking at immediate granting of TPS to Ukrainian refugees, which is what we need to be doing, as well as many others, is something that we really need to keep in mind. Because I do believe that, for example, the thousands of people who tried to seek legal refuge on our southern border, how Haitian refugees have been treated by the United States, not just in past administrations, but frankly this one, is not right. And we really need to make sure that when we talk about accepting refugees, that we are meaning it for everybody, no matter where you come from. But I do believe that this also presents a profound opportunity because of the amount of extraordinary support for Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. If we grant TPS to Ukrainian refugees, this is also an opportunity to finally create a path to citizenship for TPS recipients. A lot of people don't know that TPS recipients, by and large, do not really have a concrete path to citizenship, many have been here for decades. So I think that this is also, while there is a risk, there's also a profound opportunity for us to make the crooked path straight on this issue.
Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
Excuse me. I think that's a phenomenal response, right? It's that, you know, we need to be accepting refugees from this war immediately, and that, yeah, you see in moments like this how quickly and efficiently the American state and bureaucracy can work on certain things. And you realize that no, it is actually a choice. It's not complicated. You know, in the sense of, oh, we can't figure out all of the, you know, the specific rules and regulations that we need, you know, to recognize and bring in people from Haiti when they're fleeing situations that we played a very active role in creating, right? You know, we can act in ways quite broadly. You can also look at the amount of money that we've, you know, been sending over into Ukraine, which I think is generally fine. I'd prefer, you know, less weapons and things like that. But, you know, you can see the amount of money that, you know, is Congress is very quick to be able to send over. And you realize that the kind of funding failures that we see in this country, again, are, you know, by choice. I think AOC makes a good point there.
Yeah, I mean, just to contrast with the Haiti stuff is just unbelievable. And yeah, it's obscene.
Should we go to Corbyn or Lula first for our
Let's go to Jeremy.
Tour? Let's go to Jeremy. Jeremy Corbyn, I think, has the line on this. This is we're just going to play the first, I think, minute or two from this. You can find the whole thing at Double Down News, I believe, which is a UK outfit. Very, very good. This is the first work of theirs that I've seen, but I think this was an incredible video. You can also read the full text of this in Jacobin. It's their most recent piece attributed to Jeremy Corbyn. But this is Jeremy Corbyn, I think, truly outlining, and like we should just let this play for a couple minutes, because I think Jeremy Corbyn truly outlines what the left's response to this crisis should be. A human-centered, pro-peace approach.
I'm horrified at the war in Ukraine, horrified at the loss of life, horrified at the bombardment, and horrified at the future. The Ukrainian people are now going through an absolute hell. They're frightened of what may happen. Bombardment from the air and the arrival of tanks and other forces is terrifying. My thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. They deserve and should be able to live in peace in the future, as should the peoples of every other country of the world. We have to apply political pressure on Russia and support the public pressure that's there in Russia to end this war and to withdraw those Russian forces. And we should go back to the original agreements relating to Ukraine that were made in Budapest and the later Minsk agreement, which was designed to bring about a long-term ceasefire. All wars end with a political solution. All wars end with dialogue. Why don't we cut out the fighting zone and go straight into the talking zone? It's very easy for a politician in any parliament in the West to get up and say, go to war, go to war, go to war. It's always easy to vote for somebody else's children to go to war and die. When a war takes place, there's always a desire by the opposing sides to make sure it's only their line and their story that gets out. And so it's truth that is the first casualty in the fog of war. Keir Starmer claims that the Stop the War Coalition is a Russian stooge. There is no evidence anywhere they've done anything other than stand up for peace around the world. In my own case, there's a record going back as long as your arm, both in the Soviet Union and in post-Soviet Russia, because human rights and solidarity are universal, irrespective of the convenience or inconvenience of the time. I get accused of being pro-Russian and pro-Putin. I'm pro-human rights, actually. That's my position. Putin was promoted into office with the support of Tony Blair and some other Western leaders, and he was welcomed in the West, state visit to Britain. At that very time, the Chechen war was going on. The appalling loss of life of Chechen people and of Russian people, the abuse of the human rights of the Chechen people, the racism towards Chechens in Moscow and other cities was palpable. I was part of a delegation to Moscow with the Parliamentary Human Rights.
I mean, it's a 7-minute long video. It's just, you know, pure facts throughout. And again, like I also do think it's very worthwhile for Americans to look what's going on in the UK, particularly with the Labour Party, because it's a very, very worrying chapter.
Yeah, it's horrible. And what he said at the start about all wars end with dialogue is just a simple statement of fact. And like the experience that the UK has had with the IRA is a testament to that. Like you gotta talk.
something where
And,
they're
like, I fully can accept that, like, maybe Putin's the one who doesn't want to talk at this moment, but you got to remain the person. You got to remain wanting to talk.
exactly. You know, and thinking that further, like actual military escalation here, is going to bring that closer is completely
Yeah.
delusional and is actually antithetical, you know, to any kind of values of wanting for, you know, an end to this conflict and the suffering of people. Because, you know, it's worrying to see, you know, what could end up happening over the next, you know, few weeks, particularly if the Russian lines are sort of slowed. And they just resort to just brutal shelling of cities, right? You know, like this conflict could, you know, be going on for a long while and have very, very serious human casualties, which is why we should try to off ramp the conflict as soon as possible and with every, you know, diplomatic capability that we have to pursue. I wanted to bring up just particularly too, because I know Michael would have as well, Lula's line on this, which I think is, you know, you'll see a lot of similarities here between Corbyn and uh, and um, and Lula. I'm sorry, y'all. It's in Portuguese. There are subtitles for people watching, but if you're listening, you'll just have to listen to the passion of Lula's voice and trust that is the truth.
É lamentável que na segunda década do século XXI a gente tenha países tentando resolver suas divergências, seja territoriais, políticas ou comerciais, através de bombas, através de tiros, através de ataques, quando deveria ter sido resolvido, sabe, numa mesa de negociação. Ninguém pode concordar com guerra, ninguém pode concordar com ataques militares de um país sobre o outro, e a gente está acostumado a ver que as potências de vez em quando faz isso sem pedir licença. Foi assim que os Estados Unidos invadiu o Afeganistão, invadiu o Iraque sem pedir licença para ninguém, foi lá e invadiu. Foi assim que a França e a Inglaterra invadiram a Líbia. E é assim que a Rússia está fazendo com a Ucrânia. É importante que essas pessoas aprendam que a guerra não leva a nada a não ser a destruição, a não ser mais desemprego, mais desespero, mais fome. O ser humano tem que criar juízo e resolver as suas divergências numa mesa de negociação, nunca num campo de batalha. É lamentável que na segunda...
Sorry.
Lula, go away, buddy. Not joking.
No, I mean, I think that's another, you know, strong statement as well, recognizing, you know, that dialogue is the only way out of these things.
And yet, I don't think it's I reject the idea that it's apologizing for Putin to bring up U.S. actions in this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was when at like 3 or whatever in the morning here, when the invasion was like fully, when I first caught up with the invasion, the idea, like what it reminded me of was like I looked at on YouTube a live stream of grainy footage of Kiev, and it reminded me of the night vision footage of Shakana Baghdad.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very formative experience in my life. I was like, I didn't reject it. I wasn't an anti-war activist from that point forward, but it wasn't what I was expecting from what George Bush and all of the like sort of like people I had been like led me to believe about what we were going to do there. Right. That looked like a community. Like it looked like a town bigger than one I'd been to. That was people there. And when I saw like the traffic hit the streets in Kiev, like, I mean, I'm getting a little bit distracted, getting a little bit off track, but it was the same sort of crime. And I think we can only, like, I don't feel comfortable not putting those in the same context.
I mean, I think you're 100% right. I mean, like, and the reason I think this is so shocking to the world is that, like, it was only supposed to be America that could do that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that that's what I believe as morally just, but like, you know, there was supposed to be a kind of global understanding that America was the one that could go and invade other countries. And now Russia is trying to play the role. That doesn't excuse or justify what Putin is doing. It's monstrous, just like it was monstrous when the Americans were doing it, which is why we should be advocating for, you know, a diplomatic solution rather than, you know, plunging the world into even more war, which is exactly what happened if more actors get involved militarily on the ground.
Yeah, and you know, it's a point of curiosity I want to look up, but like this whole thing where it's like this is causing nuclear anxiety, is it just causing it? Like, was that also how do we know as Americans that that wasn't what the world was feeling in the lead up to the Iraq war and that sort of stuff, right? Like, we're at a nuclear power, we're doing stuff we shouldn't be doing. Like now we have this anxiety, and I share it. Like this, I fucking hate thinking about nuclear war, right? But like I don't know, like instead of feeling like the patriotism, the post 9/11 like bloodlust, probably a lot of people felt like, oh shit, are we gonna get fucking bombed?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, we can truly only just advocate and hope that, you know, you know, we can really seriously pursue these negotiations. I mean, you know, you've seen sort of flickers of it. At this point, what Putin's demanding, I think, is a complete non-starter. I mean, he's effectively just been demanding the complete resignation of the Ukrainian government, right? You know, but as Matt was saying earlier, it's like we have to be able to create the conditions where there are people who can pick up the call, and continue to support the anti-war movement, both within your own country, but also to show solidarity with the thousands upon thousands of Russians who have bravely stood up against a system that you cannot call by any stretch of the imagination to be democratic, or a system that really privileges, you know, civil rights. And you know, it's a tragic moment. Like, I think we could, like, there's so many more things. I mean, like, you know, just to mention, I mean, obviously the nuclear question comes up. I mean, there's a worry that, like, even if this conflict gets resolved, that it only ratchets up the desire of, you know, smaller, medium-sized countries to nuclearize, because, you know, it seems to be over and over that really is the only way to prevent, you know, intervention, you know, which I think is a tragedy for the human race, to see another rise in you know, nuclear capacity buildup, you know, and that starts, you know, is a long history, but, you know, that was one thing that was so devastating about Trump, was pulling out of our agreements. You know, people need to remember that too, as part of the context here, on top of NATO, you know, that America under Trump pulls out of disarmament agreements, right? Like, that is a worrying development. And you can say, well, Trump was an anomaly or whatever. But at a certain point, you know, if America is electing people who are pulling us out of basic kind of, you know, agreements to lower the stockpile of nuclear weapons, you know, that's a worrying escalation of, you know, of a crisis, right? We weren't able to talk about, you know, the fact that Germany is now going to expand and re-up their military budget. You know, remember that NATO, in addition to sort of being an alliance that was set up, you know, one, to combat the Soviet Union, and then post-Soviet Union to sort of project power eastward. The second bit was to prevent Germany, after World War II, re-upping and rearming its military. Right. I mean, this was a big part of it, was to secure a world where, you know, Germany wasn't going to have a large military. I mean, that paradigm looks like it's completely over. We'll see what that means, for example, within Europe. If Europe, you know, starts to pursue their own kind of, you know, increase across the board in a kind of, you know, EU European army, right? I mean, like, there are a lot of big questions. Like, this is a moment that has changed the political and particularly the, you know, the IR, you know, dynamic, frankly, forever. And I just want to just say, like, on a human level, and I know I've been talking, so I want to throw it over to you, Matt, but I just want to say on a human level, because, like, you know, it's very easy to feel flippant, or to get flippant, particularly online, about these things, right? Because these are issues that touch us deeply, and they rightfully should worry you, right? And they should hurt your heart and your soul when you see these images and you imagine what people are going through. And, you know, I think it's worthwhile to remember, at least on our side, that we're all feeling this, right? Like, I don't want to see this escalation continue. I think that this is an absolutely disgusting moment. You know, what we're advocating for here is not ignoring the tragedy or the crisis, but a recognition that, as bad as this is right now, it can get worse, right? It got worse, and it can get way worse. And what we can do is try to advocate for a future that does not, you know, pursue the worst possible option on the table right now. That is really the only sane and humane position to take. And that's the anti-war and pro-human and pro-diplomacy position. You know, we're all feeling this kind of crisis. And like, again, I understand like the feeling of like, you know, we want the, you know, the heroes to come in and to sort of eradicate, you know, these things, but the world is much more complicated than this kind of, you know, Marvel movie picture of what conflict it is. And you know, I just truly want to, I don't know, want to express like, you know, the deep sorrow that I'm feeling watching this, and also the kind of frustration that I have when people think that because you're not advocating for an American military bombing campaign or escalation of this conflict, that you're somehow, you know, not caring about the actual human suffering that's going on. You know, we're advocating for this shit to end. And the unfortunate thing is that there's not just this kind of like clear path and like, you know, to necessarily do it, right? That you can just flip a switch, right? Diplomacy is difficult. De-escalation is difficult. But it is a much less harmful and better for the human race than any kind of militaristic adventures that I see some people advocating for.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap up, I got a section. I wanted to see how the right was digesting this. Stephen Crowder says, "Don't defend NATO because they spend too much on healthcare." So I think we could skip that one. But here is this guy Frederick Kagan on Jordan Peterson's show, and I generally wasn't.
I forgot about this.
I was curious what Jordan would come down, but this is a section toward the end where he talks about the ramifications.
No one is going to talk about a ground invasion of Belarus or Russia or Kaliningrad or anything. I am confident that NATO will act, if it acts militarily at all, in an entirely defensive fashion and simply for the purpose of eliminating known imminent threats of attack to member states. But no one is going to talk about an invasion, and we're not going to do that. But we are going to have to change our force posture very fundamentally, which is going to have all kinds of ripple effects. Because this is not a short-term crisis. The threat that Putin is manifesting is a threat that's going to be here as long as Putin is here. So we're going to have to be prepared to defend Poland and Romania and the Baltic states from the Russian conventional threat. For the first time since the end of the Cold War, we're going to have to be prepared to defend against the risk of a Russian mechanized attack on NATO member states. The U.S. defense budget is not built to do that. The U.S. force posture is not structured to do that. Our national security documents are not built to do that. We're going to have to change all of that. And we're going to have to rebuild some defense capability, and we're going to have to spend more on defense because China hasn't gone away. We've spent more than 90 minutes here talking about Russia. We haven't talked about China, which is great because I'm not a China expert.
Yeah, that's
little Jordan pumping up at the end. No, I mean, from that, I mean, go off, Matt. But like, you know, from that, you know, there are going to be a lot of advocates wanting to increase American military spending, as there are the nasty freaks who are, you know, trying to drive the world to another kind of existential cliff, which is climate change, saying that, you know, the solution to this is to increase American, you know, oil manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to it other than like that's what they're getting, which is like raise budgets. I think there was another time he mentioned that, and I think there's going to be enough gas in that tank that you don't need the left to join that chorus itself. And I think it's probably best for the world that they don't.
Well, and I'll tell you what's coming next is that the Republicans are going to start shifting their tune on the conflict.
Oh yeah, did you see the Tucker? Like, there's a Daily Show sort of mashup where it contrasted the week prior and then the new live.
Oh yeah, are they moving? Biden's week.
They have moved.
Yeah. So you know, and that should be also something that people in the U.S. start to consider much more seriously domestically, because that's coming as well.